You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Sick of those trivia podcasts that you don't even understand how to operate and they just have too many levers and buttons?
There's got to be a better way.
Now there is, with Good Job Brain, an offbeat quiz show and trivia podcast that makes learning new things easy and fun.
I just learned that artificial vanilla flavoring sometimes comes from the anal glands of a beaver, and now I can never shake that mental image. Thanks, Good Job Brain.
Good Job Brain is available for the low price of just 4 easy payments of free. It's a podcast.
Good Job Brain is part of Airwave Media and available on all podcast apps. Operators are standing by.
Hold your ears, folks. It's showtime.
People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
Okay, banga banga.
Since when do you talk a native language?
I just started today.
Well, what do you say?
What do you say? I don't even know what I said.
I need you, oh, my do I, baby? Of course I do. Duke Mitchell and Sammy Petrillo turn an island paradise into the zaniest madhouse in the 7 seas. Charlita puts a gleam in Duke Mitchell's eyes. Your smile only added life to your masquerade. Muriel Landers puts the whammy on Sammy.
Sammy! Run for your life! Go on, get out of here. Run for your life.
Ramona, the romantic chimp, takes off on a romantic chase of her own.
Strange, but interesting.
Really think so? What a charming compliment.
Bela Lugosi finds the perfect subject to turn a gorilla into a goof, and versa versa.
Look, what are you trying to tell me? I don't understand a word. What am I, dumb or something? Don't answer that. Now look, Duke Mitchell, I'm running this game, you understand? And don't talk back. Yeah, now put it on, because we gotta get out that door.
Welcome to the projection booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me is Mr. Rich Whitley.
Oi, gals, gags, and goofs. I think that says it all.
Also with us is Mr. Jamie Klein.
That's me. It's too bad you can't see my background.
And last but not least, we are joined by Ms. Fredde Duke.
Hi, nice to meet everybody. And I know some of you, but
We are kicking off Shocktober 2021 with a look at William Beaudine's Bela Lugosi Meets a Brooklyn Gorilla. It's the 1952 vehicle that stars Bela Lugosi, as you may have guessed from the title, as well as the comedy duo, and I use that term loosely, Duke Mitchell and Sammy Petrillo. They're a knockoff Martin and Lewis team, and they're found on a little island in the Pacific that strangely is populated by stock footage of African animals. We will be spoiling this film if that is possible, so you have been warned. Now, I am going to go around the room here and ask when people saw this for the first time. Very curious, Freddie, when you saw it for the first time, but I will start with you, Rich. When was the first time you saw Bela Lugosi Meets a Brooklyn Gorilla?
First time I saw it was with Jamie. Jamie and I were writing partners, and we had written 2 pilots for CBS for Maurice Duke, the producer of this opus, Freddie's famous father. And so we were writing for Maurice, and we loved working with him. Every other word was motherfucker or cocksucker. And so we loved him. And he said, Jamie and I were writing a screenplay for 20th Century Fox, and we had offices next to Maurice. He called us in and he goes, hey, I'm old, you're young, let's do something together. And so we can fill in a lot of the blanks before that, but the first time we saw it was Jamie and I wanted to say thank you to Maurice. And we went down on Hollywood Boulevard, we went to Larry Edmunds and a couple stores, and we bought him bought Maurice posters of Bela Lugosi Meets the Brooklyn Gorilla, lobby cards, The Atomic Kid, of his movies, and got an VHS, probably at Eddie Brandt's, of the movie. And we gave them as gifts to Maurice to say thank you. And he goes, let's watch the fucking movie. I'll let Jamie fill in the details, but let's just say it was an X-rated version of Mystery Science 3000.
I know that he was proud of the movie in a very odd way. He was best friends with Bud Grant, who was the president of CBS at the time. And I think Bud Grant had produced a special or something, The Worst Movie of All Time, which is I think how they met. So I think that Maurice really loved the moniker of the producer of The Worst Movie of All Time.
In watching that movie, if I could share some of the X-rated things, you saw Freddie's terrific documentary on her dad, Fuck 'Em. So in watching that movie, we're watching the movie and it's all that jungle girl, she gave me a hand job in the Monogram parking lot. I could go on with other sexual acts that he did with every woman that played a jungle girl in the movie. You can imagine what they all were, and it was pretty damn funny. So it was hysterical. And if you've seen Freddie's terrific documentary, you know that's not surprising.
So, Freddie, as the daughter of the producer, when is the first time you see the film?
It would come on late at night, like pretty much in the middle of the night. So I would catch pieces of it, see his name in the credits, didn't really stick with it, probably didn't see it all. And I'm not sure I ever have, but I have. And it's basically unwatchable unless maybe you're a big pothead or something, or you really like these B films. It's so wacky. I don't smoke pot, but I'm positive that's the way to see this film.
In preparing for today, remembering that time when Jamie and I bought those posters for Maurice, I have this, and it's signed by Maurice. And yes, it says, to Richard, full of shit, Maurice Duke.
Mine is hanging in my office, and it says, kiss my brace. He had polio as a child, which is very interesting. And he had those old-time aluminum crutches that had a cuff around the forearm. And he's not ashamed. He was just as full of life as anybody I've ever known in my life. I mean, he was really remarkable. He was really unstoppable, this guy.
A real force of nature. We were in a trailer. We were afraid if Fox hated our script, they'd just hook up the trailer and drag us down Pico Boulevard.
Which they ended up doing, actually. They did.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, honest, the third act will be better. I remember whenever we went to Maurice's office, which was like 15 feet away, it was just, oh my God, it was like one of the Weir brothers were there. And we met the guy who wrote the lyrics for Undecided, Sid Robin, and all these people. And they were like, oh my God, it was just, and we knew who they were. They probably thought we were 12 years old, but we knew who these guys were because of our love of
How did you know who they all were?
Because we loved old movies. In those days, there was the Nuart and the Sherman and the Vagabond showing all revival movies in those days. And then when VHS came, I would call every local station and ask what their running time was of the film in a 2-hour slot, because I had my Leonard Maltin movie books and I would know the exact running time. And so if it was 3 minutes less, I wouldn't VHS, time it. And so I loved all these movies. This is the business I wanted to be in. So I loved it.
You are a true movie nerd.
I am.
I love that.
Well, yeah, with Sid Robin, when Maurice said he wrote the lyrics for Undecided, I started singing it, and he couldn't believe it. I mean, what were we? We were 27, maybe 25. something like that. And these guys were already kind of past their prime and a little, pardon the phrase, but irrelevant, and they had no idea. I was in a dry cleaner, and the person in front of me, the guy said, "What's your name?" He said, "Sammy Fain." I went, "Sammy Fain?" He wrote "Love is a Many Splendored Thing." And I started singing it right there. And he was like, "Oh my God, how do you know that?" And he was like, 70. And here's this 22-year-old kid singing a song that he wrote, 50 years ago. And so it was just kind of like how we were and how we are.
Did you guys meet Henry Nemo?
We did not meet Nemo, but we did meet Bob Hilliard. Bob Hilliard used to hang out there all the time.
Who wrote the
Honeymooners? That's right. And actually, one of the Honeymooners episodes references Bob Hilliard's name. He's our neighbor, Bob Hilliard. And these guys were all professionals, whether we knew them or not. It was just kind of like this gathering place for these guys, and it was a lot of fun for us.
Now, Freddie, Maurice managed Sammy Petrillo and Duke Mitchell, right?
Yes, he usually managed the people that he put into movies. So he was like package deal, like very early before people were doing that. I guess there's a thing against that with agents right now to do too much packaging. That's why you guys had to sign off and not have agents for a while. But he was like one of the first people that did that. He handled Mickey Rooney, and he would be his manager. Then he would put him in a movie. So, he did that a lot.
He handled Sabu, too, right?
And Joe Louis.
And Hunt's Hall.
Zero Mostel.
Really? Wow.
He handled Zero Mostel. Oh, my God.
Mickey Rooney and Zero Mostel were probably the two really famous. Maybe he handled the Andrews sisters and,
Maxine and Laverne.
So wait a second. Hunt's Hall, we're not going to have to tell the story now,
tell the story.
Mike, but
maybe.
Someone has to tell the story. Jamie and I figured that this movie is a gateway drug to Maurice Duke.
Freddie, I've got a question, though. Who's taller, your dad or Mickey Rooney?
Okay, my dad's 5'1". How tall is Mickey? 5'2" or 3"?
Maybe.
Maybe. When you see them in pictures, and I have a lot of pictures of the two, they look the same height. Mickey got laid a lot. Okay? Every woman. Maybe my mom fucked Mickey. I don't know.
Hey, you know what, Freddie? Your dad was no slouch.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. Half the cast of Bela Lugosi Meets the Brooklyn Gorilla. And we're not going to mention how the chimp got the job. We're kind of afraid right now to mention that. So,
have you ever had one of your podcasts go this X-rated that quickly?
Not that quickly, no. I mean, Salo 120 Days of Sodom got a little X-rated, but yeah.
I always think about him in this climate, the Me Too climate, because, the things he said. But he said it with like a twinkle in his eye. When he would talk about somebody's tits, he'd be like, "Nice tit." But really, like, no woman was ever offended. I never saw one woman offended. Never.
It was remarkable that he was remarkable that way.
He was. I remember when he first started telling us about the movie and I had not heard of it, he said that the goal was to have billboards and posters outside the theater without their names so that people would think they're actually paying to see Dean and Jerry.
I believe that the original intention of the movie, because it was made right after My Friend Irma and My Friend Irma Goes West, which were huge, and Martin and Lewis just exploded on the scene. And Maurice, I guess, discovered Sammy Petrillo and Duke Mitchell in a nightclub act and started handling them. And then thought, well, let's make a movie with these guys. And I think it was at Republic or Monogram. He was a B movie producer at a B movie studio. So they put these guys in this movie for the sole purpose of making the movie and selling it to Paramount to keep them from distributing the movie. They shot it in 10 days at a cost of $50,000. I've heard several versions of this, but one of the versions was Paramount heard about it, saw it, made an offer, and the other producer turned the offer down and said, "That's okay, we'll distribute it."
Jack Broder.
And Maurice went, you'll pardon the expression, apeshit, because, he just wanted to sell it to Paramount just to get it out and make their money back.
They were sending cease and desist letters and threatening Broder, and because the people who handled Jerry and Dean were very protective of their rights. So they kept sending cease and desist letters, but somebody sneaked and saw the film and went, oh, fuck it, release that piece of shit. No one's going to care.
In your doc, isn't there a story where Jerry actually sat down and watched the movie with your dad in the theater?
Hal Wallace, maybe?
Yeah. And Jerry's just like, yeah, good luck.
Yeah. But in the beginning, Jerry was mad, and he was a good friend of my father's, and he was offended. Then he was mad at helping Sammy's career because he was the first person on the Colgate Hour to give Sammy the job of the impersonation of him. And then he was like, regretted doing that because Sammy then made this little small act a thing the rest of his life. That's all. One note, that's it.
In The Total Filmmaker, and Lewis is always talking about wanting to be like Chaplin and write and direct and star in his movies. And yet at the same time Chaplin was a big star, there was a guy named Billy West who was doing spot-on Chaplin impersonations and doing two-reelers that were seen by millions, And so you think it'd be some form of flattery, but not Jerry. No, I don't.
No, Jerry was a tricky one.
Jamie, you said 10 days for $50,000. I also read 6 days for $12,000. So it was like, you never know. It's like, but the thing I read was that Sammy Petrillo was only 17 years old.
Yeah, he was a kid. Yeah.
Yeah. So the movie would have driven him to drink, but he wasn't old enough to buy one.
By the way, absolutely exquisite poster, worth a lot of money, like almost as much as what the film cost.
Right. Do you have one?
I only have what you have with some beautiful lobby cards. Those posters are terribly expensive. I don't know why people love this movie. I guess because it's so camp.
Freddie, you went to that screening at the Cinematheque, right?
Well, you are my personal Google alert for all things Maurice Duke or Bela Lugosi. And you told me that Leonard Maltin was having a film festival at the Egyptian 3 years ago, very recently, before the pandemic. And it was like my dad was in a film festival. It was like the most exciting thing. And Broder's family went, and my kids went. We all went, and there was a gorilla there. It was just like, how nice of Leonard Maltin to do that.
Well, Freddie sent you that photo of Maurice with the chimp, right?
Right.
How cool is that photo?
That's amazing.
With the cigars in his pocket,
He always promised me he was going to give me that chimp as a gift, it'll be like your pet. So I was really disappointed that he didn't really bring the chimp home, to be my pet. Instead,
he gave you Sammy Petrillo as a gift, which was odd. Aside from Bela, I'm guessing the chimp was the most famous character in the movie, right?
That chimp has his own IMDb page.
Yes, right. Now, was that one of the cheetahs at the time? Because they kept on making Tarzan movies, right?
Oh, it could be. I mean, I think that animal worked a lot, as much as Mickey Rooney almost.
How did Bela get involved with the film?
Because my dad saw him on this studio lot, thought, I'll just hire him because he's got a name. And that way they all thought they could throw the name into the title because he had a star name, but he was apparently addicted to morphine and wasn't the Bela Lugosi of before, but it brought a name to the movie, which is what you can't get a movie made now without a name.
Brad Pitt meets the Brooklyn Gorilla. Just, I don't know. I don't know if that would work.
I like how the article is a Brooklyn Gorilla. Like there are many Brooklyn Gorillas, a lot of gorillas just running around in Brooklyn.
I'll tell you that I was so honored. I don't know when it was, 8, 10, 15, it's probably 15 years ago in the New York Times Magazine. All these famous people were asked, what movies would you take on an island if you were going and you were going to be on an island? What are the 5 top movies? And Christopher Guest, his last one was Bela Lugosi Meets the Brooklyn Gorilla. And apparently he, Eugene Levy, all these people are obsessed because Christopher Guest had a thing about this movie. People do.
The desert island was Cola-Cola.
Cola-Cola? Sounds like a commercial for some bubble water.
When you realize the reveal at the end that it's a dream, because when you're watching the movie, you're going, wait a second, that's just white guys wearing Hawaiian shirts made to look like natives, and they were probably Maurice's friends or the car park guys or bouncers, and then the reveal is, oh, they are bouncers and car park guys at the end of the movie.
And my movie that I have in a festival turns out to be a dream. I'm just copying everything my dad did.
I kept waiting throughout the whole film because when they first are shown, like we get this voiceover talking about these wild animals. We're getting the stock footage of all these things. And then they were on their way to Guam to basically entertain the troops, kind of like setting this a little bit as far as like where we are in the timeline. And they're all in tuxedos and have this long growth of beards. I'm just like, how long have these guys been on here? What's going on? You know, like I'm asking all these questions like place and setting and background and all this. And then when it ends up being a dream, I'm like, oh, okay. Because for a while, I thought maybe it was like this endless loop. Like they would eventually get back in tuxedos and their hair would grow out. And then like this thing happens to them all the time. They just keep waking up and interacting with Bela Lugosi.
That would have been better.
It would have been better.
If Christopher Nolan had directed this, maybe that.
Or Rian Johnson did Looper, so that would have worked. They're wearing beard. They have beards. How long were they lying in this? But you're right. It's like, how long were they there? That's like ridiculous, you know? And it's a good thing. Let's get you out of those clothes because we happen to have neatly pressed chinos for you to wear.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. Is it Bella's wearing a suit? I'm wondering, where does he get that dry cleaned? It's a white suit and it's pressed. It's like, what?
I'm going to a desert island. I better take my suit of armor.
I know, yeah. What's a suit of armor doing there? It's very strange. How do they make the iron for the knockers on the door? Where does that but it's a dream, so it's okay.
It was a dream of extraordinary magnitude.
But let's give a shout out to Tim Ryan, the screenwriter who was married to Irene Ryan, who played Granny Clampett. I'm guessing a buddy of your dad's.
Everyone was. I remember going with Buddy Ebsen and my dad out to the valley where I have to go tonight to see one of the Weir brothers perform. Yeah.
Wait, you went with your dad and Buddy?
I went off to Buddy Ebsen. Sorry, I'm just like because
your dad and Buddy Ebsen went off to the valley to see the Weir brothers perform.
Yeah,
it's like that's like one of the best Hollywood stories.
Was very tall. That's what I remember about Buddy. Is he used to perform with the Weir brothers probably in vaudeville. My dad is originally from vaudeville. He was a harmonica player in a harmonica band, and then he realized he should just manage the band. He wouldn't have to perform. He'd make a lot more money. So then he parlayed that into becoming a producer. But they all knew each other, this whole group of people from vaudeville.
I think your dad knew everybody.
He did. He really, really did. To the point where one time in my entire life, I would say, if I saw anyone famous, I'd be like, hi, I'm Maurice Duke's daughter. And they all knew him. Only person, the only one was Johnny Carson. It was at Nate Nell's at the deli. And I remember going, you must know my dad, like Maurice Duke. And if I say his name, people usually flip out and go, oh my God, the Duke. Johnny Carson, like blank. Nope, don't know your dad. I was so offended.
So Sammy and Duke wake up on this island and they're taken in by these tribes people who, to your point from earlier, are a lot of white people. There's Al Kakume, who I think is Hawaiian. I think he's Pacific Islander. And he's great. There's Milton Newberger as Bongo, the witch doctor, who... Does he ever take off that mask the whole time? Okay. Even eats with it.
As one does.
And if we haven't made this clear before, Duke is the Dino of the group and Sammy is the Jerry of the group. And of course, Dino has to get laid right away. So he's met up with Charlita as Nona. Charlita, who I kept looking for a last name for, but I guess she was like the Madonna of her day. She did not have a last name.
Was she a singer or an actress under contract or?
I mean, she does have one soundtrack song that she sang El Hombre in The Naked Dawn, but for the most part, I'm just seeing a lot of acting credits, and she was in a bunch of stuff. She was in 55 films or TV series.
Did your dad manage other people that were in the movie?
Probably, or was fucking some of them. I don't know.
So whoever it was behind that mask was someone different each week.
By the way, my mother was probably pregnant with me when the movie came out and pregnant with my brother when they were making the movie.
Also, we have a lot of fat shaming in the movie, thanks to Muriel Landers as Saloma.
Even if you read like Wikipedia about it, they're fat shaming in the description.
She seems like a very lovely person, and she definitely wants to get with Sammy, and he should just be happy about that because the guy is a twig.
But at the end, when he wakes up, they are together, right?
Yes, and he seems to be okay with it, which is great.
He seems fine, But, she could probably be arrested because he's 17, but other than that...
But I have to say, the person that impressed me the most in the entire film was Mickey Simpson as Chula, the assistant to Bela Lugosi's Dr. Zabor character. Mickey Simpson also was in a lot of stuff, but I don't know how. I mean, unless they just told him, like, do not play any emotion. I mean, he's basically the Tor Johnson of this film.
Time for go to bed.
He probably went to the Tor Johnson School of Acting. I mean, not much emotion at all. But let me ask you, Mike, when you're talking about all these characters, going back to the story, it's like Bela gets so excited. He goes, now I can change a man into a gorilla. Why?
Yeah.
Why?
The other thing is that he injected Ramona and she turned into a baby chimp. How does this indicate that you can turn now a human being into a gorilla? I don't understand the connection there. That's quite a Kierkegaardian leap there.
Is that because they think that because men evolved from apes, that's taking them backwards?
Wait. This is all Sammy's dream. Why are we trying to analyze this?
We're analyzing Sammy's Petrillo's
dream. For insights into Sammy.
I'm glad that it just reinforces that when you do have to think and solve a problem, you pace back and forth. It's very important to know.
Yes, even if you're an ape.
Even if you're an ape, exactly.
I love the charades. He's playing charades.
I think they thought they were going to make a series of these movies. That was, my dad's intention. That was Sammy's intention. Probably not Duke's. I don't think that Duke was that keen on being Sammy's partner or being... He really fancied himself a singer, a serious singer. So he wasn't keen on the whole thing. But my dad, and originally they thought they could make a series of pictures because my dad liked to make like a lot of teenage pictures or something, like a series of them. But once this one was such a stinker, that was it. Until people saw it later on TV and got into the camp of it.
But then your dad started to produce the teen drive-in the rock and roll movies where you and your brother...
He did that before it. Anything that was a new craze, my dad jumped on and made movies about. And whatever it took. So like Louis Prima, he went to find the money to make a twisting picture because twisting was in style. He just liked the new crazes.
His mentor was someone like Sam Katzman, I'm guessing, and your dad, like Sam Katzman and Arkoff and Corman, they're all kind of like, what's in the headlines? We're going to make a movie and we can get it out in 8 weeks.
Yes, get it out in a week. I don't know.
The thing about Duke Mitchell, I mean, fans of the projection booth will probably know Duke Mitchell mostly because he was the person behind Gone with the Pope, which is one of these movies that was lost for years, and Grindhouse Releasing put it out, and he was writer, director, and star of Gone with the Pope, because otherwise he was in some stuff that I recognize, but that's the most famous one.
I must admit, I don't know that movie.
Yeah, well, Sammy was in Keyholes Are for Peeping.
The Shangri-La is the one that I saw, and that whole thing of him talking about, this vacation he was on. I mean, it's very, I know it wasn't directed by Herschel Gordon Lewis, but it felt very Herschel Gordon Lewis as far as like, I have this footage that I'm going to use, and I'm going to just have this guy narrate over it and tell this story. So kind of an interesting way of
Well, what year was that?
That was 61.
So 10 years later, he got hired and he starred in this movie, Sammy?
as if you could call it starring, I mean, a lot of it is him narrating stock footage, basically, or like footage of like nudist camps and things. So it's like basically it's his sex tourism, and he's narrating the story.
Hey, I'll tell you what. I've got precisely 30 minutes until I have to leave. What say we play one last game of cards together, okay? Hey, take it easy, boy. Don't go away.
I haven't seen him. I just looked at his IMDb page, and it was just a funny title.
I guess I haven't seen it. I'll wait till it comes out on Criterion.
Actually, since they are showing, I think they're showing a bunch of Doris Wishman stuff on Criterion Channel. So,
really?
Yeah. So Keyholes Are for Peeping might be on there.
There we go. Keyholes Are for Peeping. As Jamie used to say, write that down and then cross it out.
I never realized how tall Bela Lugosi is unless he's standing on an apple box in this, because he towers over everybody else in this film other than his man-at-arms.
Yeah, and then he towered it over him. So I think that's standing in a hole, standing on an apple box. Because he's like 2 feet taller than Bela Lugosi. Some of those shots, it's like, I don't think so.
But I think Bela was legitimately taller than Duke Mitchell and Sammy Petrillo.
Yeah, it seems like it.
Yeah. And it's like when you see Three Stooges shorts, it's like when they're with normal, regular people, they look very short. So that's a Shemp story. Should we tell the Shemp story, Jamie, or no?
Yeah, I guess you can. Sure.
Maurice was friends with Shemp. As Freddie, you could probably go in greater detail. Maurice had a specially built car so he could drive because he had polio, right? So I think the steering wheel was where the passenger seat was, right? It was like kind of...
No, it was regular steering wheel, but on the steering wheel was something right beside the wheel was the brake, just attached to the steering wheel. So that he didn't have to use brakes with his feet. He wouldn't have touched he couldn't have done it.
And he told the story that he was driving with Shemp, and Shemp rolled down the window and would yell out the windows they were driving, "I'm driving with a cripple! Help me! A cripple is driving this car!"
There are so many sick stories, even with Jerry Lewis and everyone, about like making fun of my dad's physical handicap. But they're great. I mean, they're such good Hollywood stories. By the way, the very first time I ever realized that my dad knew famous people were the Three Stooges, because they were with us at dinner. I was highly aware of who they were, and he knew everyone, Sammy Davis Jr., every single person. But those three, a couple of the Stooges were with us at dinner, and I was like, oh my God, I was a little child going, they're famous. Everyone's looking at us. It was the first, moment of realizing that.
They didn't serve pie, did they?
I hope. But that's exciting that like all these big stars, the ones you realize are the Stooges,
Not Mickey Rooney, not Sammy, not Frank, the Stooges. And then here's another quickie. Harry Morton was this character that all the comics were friends with. And he might have been used as a name in a famous television show or something. But so Harry Morton is a prankster. And they were in this open car, Harry, Jerry Lewis, my dad, and they see three broads, as they say, on the street. And they ask them if they want to ride, and they think they can only see the heads and everything. And they go, wow, three guys are asking us. Jerry wasn't totally famous yet. He was a comic, but not all the way there. And they get in the car. They go to this club. They just picked them up off the street. They get in the car. Now my dad gets out first because he takes a long time with his brace and his cane. And he's got to click the brace, takes a long time, and he starts walking the way he walks, which is from side to side. Jerry walks from side to side. Harry does the same gimpy walk, like picked on these, got picked up by three handicapped men.
I never heard that one.
Very mean-spirited, but it's funny.
No, it's not. It's kind of showing what good friends
sweet,
they were and how much they loved your dad. I think it's kind of sweet, It's like
then Jerry did what he did for muscular dystonia. He would not want people to know that he was mocking a disabled person.
It seems like he's doing it for his friend.
I don't see that as mocking. I see that as supporting.
They were doing it to fuck with the women. With the women, like, oh God,
I mean, by the time they three got out of the car and at the door of the restaurant, they were gone. These women.
I got to be at work in the morning. Yeah, I loved what your dad used to say about Phil Foster. When the check came to the table, he had the shortest arms in show business. Would never reach for the check. That's a great visual.
He said it a lot about Keith Salters, if anyone knew who that was. He was a PR guy with a lot of money. Yeah, and never paid the check. My dad always paid the check. That's why my dad was always broke.
One of the reasons why we're not talking about the movie as much as normal is because there's not a lot of stuff here. I mean, really, when I was watching it, it felt like maybe a 15-minute skit that they stretched out to, 75 minutes?
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple music breaks, as are to be expected, and Duke has a very good voice, I have to say. He does a great job with those, and the Too Soon to Know is pretty good. He even gets to sing it again as a gorilla, which is fantastic. But as the title says, they meet Bela Lugosi, or I guess it goes both ways, and he turns Duke into a gorilla so that he won't woo the island girl when Duke was the gorilla and there's the other gorilla that comes to him. I thought that other gorilla was going to be like Salima and not leave him alone, but I guess it was a male gorilla. I'm not sure what was going on with that, with the two gorillas there.
I remember when Jamie and I were writing those pilots for Maurice, and we would turn in the scripts, and he goes, this scene, where's the funnies? Where the fuck is the funnies? We need the funnies here, That was his note. It's like, that was his note.
The joke was when they did the Atomic Kid, Maurice pitched it as one guy's radioactive and the other one isn't.
Because I'm not sure my dad ever really liked to read the whole script.
One's radioactive, the other isn't. It's a match made in Los Alamos at a theater near you. Sometimes he would, in telling a story, Maurice would say he would either forget a name, or if he was pitching us an idea, he would come up with another phrase. He goes, Snoopy Poopy. Have Snoopy Poopy come in. And he would use this phrase, Snoopy Poopy, a lot. And then Jamie goes, of the Baltimore Snoopy Poopies.
Baltimore Poopies.
We got a newspaper headline, and we faked a headline and said, Snoopy Poopy signs 3 pick pack or something. And we gave it to him as a joke for variety or something.
Caught in love triangle.
Silly.
My husband wrote a script about my father right after he died, but didn't tell me he was writing the Maurice Duke movie. And he handed it to me, and he got down all of those wacky, when my dad couldn't come up with words and he made up words. He got it all without being around him that much. He was around him for about 6 years. And it's such a good script that nobody's made.
I've read that script. What is it called? The Money in You?
Plenty of Money in You. John Landis just took an interest in it.
But wasn't Danny DeVito going to play your dad, right?
He actually turned it down because he had played a producer.
It's a terrific script. Michael and Jim wrote a great script. It's really good.
He's actually more of an authority on my father than I am. I've had him write me some cheat sheets here. Seriously, he knows more about the making of Bela Lugosi Meets a Brooklyn Gorilla. He gave Leonard Maltin the cease and desist letters that night. Ahead of it, he went, you might be interested in this. And he wrote a whole thing to Leonard. He really is, the son-in-law of Maurice Duke and the authority on him.
Wait a second. Is he down the hall filming a special? Why can't we bring in Michael?
Tell me if you guys want him. I'll grab him. 5 minutes with Michael?
Absolutely. If he knows more than we do, I'm fine. We're doing Maurice bits because Freddie was saying that you have the cease and desist letters and you know a lot more about the movie than anyone should.
We do have copies of that Hal Wallace and Paramount Pictures tried to get Maurice Duke and Real Art Pictures to restrain from releasing the picture. Duke saw this as a great opportunity because he thought he could make more by burning the negative than actually releasing the movie. They threatened Mitchell and Petrillo with taking their intellectual property if you can imagine Jerry Lewis's act as being somebody's intellectual property. I think the scheme in which Duke was trying to hold them up for money was blown when Broder, the head of Real Art Pictures, screened the picture for Hal Wallace and Jerry Lewis, unbeknownst to Maurice Duke. And they realized they had nothing to fear from it.
All it takes is a few frames.
It almost sounds like a real-life Bialystock and Bloom plot.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he was hoping that he could cash in on burning the film. And it was only because it was screened in advance that he actually had to release it.
I love it. Let's make a movie, and my goal is to have it destroyed.
His attitude was, why should Martin and Lewis be the only ones who could make a Martin and Lewis film? So he put together his own Martin and Lewis, and the rest is cinematic history.
Michael, maybe I'd love to know this. I know that Maurice managed Duke and Sammy, but were they already a team by the time he saw them in a nightclub?
I don't know all the details. I think he put them together, though.
How do you find Duke and Sammy?
Yeah, I don't think they were working together already.
I think he did put them together. So they were kind of doing it as a little bit of a comedy act on, sort of. I'm not sure Duke Mitchell loved it.
Sammy Petrillo had a history of doing Jerry Lewis. He did it on the Burl Show, and he did it later on the Colgate Comedy Hour for Martin and Lewis, where he played, I think, Jerry's little brother or something. And he was like 16 years old, and he was almost a clone for Lewis's act. I mean, he had, it was paint by numbers, but he knew it all, and the inflections and everything. And so Duke had this kid who was the basis of the mock Martin and Lewis, and he knew he needed a sort of handsome singer to put with him, and he found Duke Mitchell, and that was Mitchell and Petrillo.
So the film did get released. Did it have much of a release?
It did have a release, and the whole budget of the film was $50,000, so it didn't mean that much of a release. It was released, and I don't know if he made any money on it. It's probably doubtful.
My dad thought that people would assume they were really seeing a Lewis and Martin movie because he thought they did such a good impression that he thought there'd be lines around the block. People would think they were seeing them, but he was wrong.
That's an understatement.
That was actually Jerry Lewis's fear. He knew he had not much of an act. Personality, Jerry Lewis, but he didn't really have an act you could transcribe. And so when another guy came along who could also do Jerry Lewis, Lewis was unnerved by this, and that's why the lawsuit came about.
But after the movie, even if it didn't have much of a release, Maurice continued to book him in nightclubs and stuff, right? Like in Vegas and things.
Yeah, but I really don't think Duke Mitchell was into it at all.
I remember seeing that movie on $1 Million Movie, which was a local TV show, Channel 9, WRTV in New York, a show called $1 Million Movie, and they would show the same movie 4 times a day, all week. That movie was one of them, and I remember the first time I tuned in the middle of that movie, and I thought, wait, that's a Jerry Lewis movie, and I was a huge fan of Jerry Lewis, and about 5 minutes into it, I realized that's not Lewis.
Yeah, $1 Million Movie. They couldn't have had something that said $50,000 movie. That would not have been a big audience for that one.
But in looking up the director, William Beaudine, like 500 credits, it said that he directed half of the Bowery Boy movies. So I was wondering if Maurice.
From my dad, yeah.
Yeah, so I was wondering if that's how Maurice knew and brought Beaudine in.
Probably. That sounds right.
I have to hear the Hans Hall story.
You mean because my dad managed Hans and kept saying to Burl, please put Hans on the show?
Exactly.
You tell that story.
I'll tell the story. So Hans Hall is looking for work, and he comes into Duke's office, and he goes, hey, and Hans Hall was the rubbery-faced Bowery Boy. He was the Satch to the other guy, Leo Gorski. So he comes into Duke's office, as they did in those days, and said, look, you got to book me. I need work. I haven't done Bowery Boys in a while. There's this new show, this Milton Berle thing. There's this TV, which I'd love to get a shot on. Maurice said, look, I talked to Burl. He said he can't use you. And it's I talked to him a couple times and he can't do it. So just then in walks Burl. And he goes, hey, you know Hunt's Hall, you like his work. Come on, give him a job. And he goes, I do. I'm a big fan of yours, Hunt's, but I really can't use you on the show. And Duke says, all right, look, I hear you got a pretty big cock. And Burl goes, well, you heard right. And Duke says, Hunt's here, he's pretty good too. Why don't the two of you guys drop your pants? If Hunt's is bigger than you give him 2 weeks on the show. Okay, all right. So Hunt's Hall and
but Hunt's is shaking.
Hunt's Hall and Milton Berle drop trow in Maurice's office, right? So Maurice takes his cane and he takes the tip off of his cane, the rubber tip off of his cane, and he goes, "All right, you want me to measure from the balls or from the asshole?" He said, "I gave Hunt another little half inch. He did 2 weeks on the show."
My memory is that Hunt's was terrified, put his essence of Huntsness onto the table, was so dramatically shorter than Milton, and Maurice reached across the table, grabbed Hunt by the schlong, and yanked him across
I don't remember that at all. Wow.
I heard
that Burl used to say, "Do you want me to take out just enough?
Yeah, take out just enough to win." Yes,
right.
I've heard that one too.
That he yanked him across the table, and then Burl was laughing so hard.
So it completely changed. Every time I see the Bowery Boys now, it completely changed Hunt's Hall for me.
So really, there isn't much of a conclusion to this film as far as, does he ever come back from being a gorilla? I think it's Sammy. Basically, it all takes place back at the village, and we've got Sammy and Duke, who is now still a gorilla, and then Bela Lugosi and his henchmen show up, and then Bela, surprisingly, shoots Sammy, and I was like, where is this movie going? How will they get out of this thing? And how will they get back to being those bearded tuxedo guys from the beginning? I want this to happen. But no.
A dream, wasn't it?
It was just a dream.
Of course it was. And it took Duke forever to wake Sammy up. Next time you see the movie, why it's like a minute of him, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. It's like, I don't know what's going on.
And then it becomes the Wizard of Oz for a while. And it's just like, I just had the weirdest dream. And you were there, and you were there.
Exactly.
My dad wasn't sometimes very original.
And at least we get to see a little bit of their nightclub act, though I was hoping for like another 10 minutes just to see what these guys were like when they're not stuck in the jungle.
But wait a second. Your dad was original in his theft. As Michael so eloquently said, Duke said, wait, there's a Martin and Lewis. Why can't there be another Martin and Lewis?
All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and take a break, and we're going to play an interview with Gary Rhodes, the co-author of the 2-book set, Becoming Dracula, The Early Days of Bela Lugosi, and we'll be back with that right after these brief messages.
Sick of those trivia podcasts that you don't even understand how to operate and they just have too many levers and buttons?
There's got to be a better way.
Now there is, with Good Job Brain, an offbeat quiz show and trivia podcast that makes learning new things easy and fun.
I just learned that artificial vanilla flavoring sometimes comes from the anal glands of a beaver, and now I can never shake that mental image. Thanks, Good Job Brain.
Good Job Brain is available for the low price of just 4 easy payments of free. It's a podcast.
Good Job Brain is part of Airwave Media and available on all podcast apps. Operators are standing by.
Join me, Jamie Benning, on the Filmimentaries podcast, particularly if you enjoy stories like designer Nilo Rhodes Jamiro convincing George Lucas to push him around to help gain the support of his crew on the ailing Howard the Duck.
Blam! The door opens. It's George. Everybody gasps. George makes a beeline to me. I'm literally back against the wall.
Or hear puppeteer Tim Rose's emotional story behind that iconic Admiral Akbar shot in Return of the Jedi.
I believe that war is something to be proud of, but not to celebrate.
Or how Star Wars editor Paul Hirsch tackled cutting so many successful films.
The thing that I learned from working with De Palma is that tension depends on a clock. You need to have the sense that time is running out.
Maybe Oscar-winning sound designer Mark Mangini's insightful chat about his work on Blade Runner 2049.
Not a single sound from the original Blade Runner in the new film. A great deal of inspiration.
That's the Filmumentaries podcast with me, Jamie Benning.
You obviously love podcasts, but are you also a fan of movies and television? Do you want to listen to a show that reviews entertainment honestly and casts pretentiousness to the wind? That debates both film and TV topics in a fun, good-spirited way, while still getting to the heart of why we all love them so much? Then don't miss the award-winning weekly podcast, The Hollywood Outsider, now available on your favorite podcast app or at thehollywoodoutsiders.com.
This is Adam Spiegelman from the Cult Movie Podcast, Proudly Resents. And you're listening to my favorite movie podcast, The Projection Booth. I know. It's messed up, right?
Can you tell me a little bit more about kind of how you got your start in film scholarship?
I suppose my love of film scholarship began when I was a little kid. It was still the period when there were really 3 networks and PBS. By the time I was 10 or 12, everybody started getting VHS players in the home. But before that, it was still the 3 networks. And that meant that, a lot of us were still seeing the same thing. Even if we were young, we were seeing old black and white films from 30, 40, 50 years earlier. And so I grew up with a love my parents had of classical Hollywood movies. And so that started when I was very young. I suppose the first film book I remember was one I absconded from my sister. She had bought it. It was a little paperback for children of classic movie monsters. And that became another love of mine, reading about the films. And even in that pre-video, home video period, staring at still photographs of movies I was longing to see, some of which I didn't get to see for several more years. Films like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu, the German expressionist films of the 1920s, for example. And so those were my earliest, encounters with film history and film scholarship.
And how did you turn that love into what you do today?
By the time I was getting a little older, 10, 11, 12, I was buying some very intelligent but very accessible books by some of the early film historians, relatively early film historians at least, like William K. Everson and Carlos Clarence. And so I was really loving what they were doing. So by the time I was 12, I really knew, and by that time also had a home video player and was able to access so much more, including silent films. I knew that by the age of 12, I wanted to be a film historian. I knew I wanted to write books like they were writing. I knew that I also was very interested in documentary films about film history, because though I didn't know him for many years thereafter, and he's a good friend of mine, Kevin Brownlow, was one of the great, not only film historians, but documentary filmmakers, where he was making films about people like, for example, Charlie Chaplin, the first one of his documentaries I saw on PBS. And of course, those kinds of documentaries really made things come alive, because you saw the people being interviewed. There were still lots of the early folks living and could be interviewed. But also, unlike books and their photographs, what was so exciting to me about work like his was that if he was mentioning a particular scene in a film, you actually saw it rather than simply reading about it, because there's a limitation of when we're writing about a scene, text can only go so far in capturing visual or audiovisual of a film. So that was by that time I knew I was deeply interested in the area. And a very lucky thing happened to me when I was 13. I was already well aware of some of these writers, and I was well aware of one named Forrest J. Ackerman. And I knew him through his magazine, which was aimed at children, and I was one, Famous Monsters of Filmland. I also knew through the magazine and some of his television appearances as an interviewee, I knew what he looked like. And the most wonderfully fortuitous moment of my life probably happened, certainly my film life. We were in Tulsa, Oklahoma, my family and I. My dad was off to some business. We were waiting for him in the lobby. This was before cell phones or anything. It was 1985. And all of a sudden, a gentleman walks past wearing a leisure suit, as Forey always did. And he goes to the elevators. And I say to my mother and sister, that was Forrest Ackerman. And their first response was, who is Forrest Ackerman? And the second response would be, what would he be doing in Tulsa, Oklahoma at a Doubletree hotel? And I was a shy kid, but I mustered all of my confidence and everything. I went to the counter, talked to the clerk and said, as if I knew him, could you please connect me to Forrest Ackerman's room? Again, we're pre-cell phone. So I was on the desk phone and he picked up. He really was him. And he told his wife, this was something he joked about for many years thereafter because we became very good friends, but he joked with his wife, unbeknownst to me, or he told his wife, well, I'm going downstairs to meet a fan of my work. I'll be back in 5 or 10, 15 minutes. Well, he and I ended up speaking about 3 hours that night. And though it was 1985, my dad actually, of all yet other wonderful things, he had a video camera in the car. And so Dad even ended up filming about an hour of this impromptu meeting between me and Ackerman, me asking him all kinds of questions and him so wonderfully and politely talking to, a 13-year-old kid. Well, by the time he got back to Los Angeles, we were talking a bit on the phone. Within a couple of months, he invited me to a big event at the Los Angeles Biltmore Hotel. I had just turned 14 and was all of a sudden, thanks to him, meeting people like Ray Bradbury and Ray Harryhausen and Kurt Siodmak, who had written the original Wolfman film in 1941. And I was meeting all of these wonderful people thanks to him. And our friendship continued to grow, and he became my first agent. And he agented my first paid work as a film historian. I was 16, and it was for a magazine that, of all things, I still write for, even though I'm 49 now. And that's a magazine called Film Facts. It's spelled with an X on the cover, Film Facts. And I wrote for them for the first time, I guess it was 87 or so, thanks to him. So that is the long version, apologies, but that is how I guess I came to be. It was a few lucky things.
How did you get interested in writing so much about Bela Lugosi?
I think it was similar to the fact that I was able to recognize Forey Ackerman in Tulsa that day, meaning that I loved horror films most of all. I loved all old movies, and I loved the current movies. I mean, I was 5 years old seeing Star Wars in the theater, and so I was as equally interested in modern films, or what were then modern films of the late 70s and 80s, as I was the old movies. But my favorite of all, I loved all the genres, all of the periods, but my favorite of all were horror films. Even as a little kid, seeing a handful of them on Shock Theater on TV. My mother loved them when she was a kid, and so I got some of that love from her, us watching them together. And I guess so many little kids, have a fascination with ghost stories around the campfire, or all aspects of horror and all things grisly and ghostly. And so I did too. And Lugosi was, of course, Dracula. I think he really reinscribed that Bram Stoker character so completely with his looks and appearance and costume, very different in many respects, certainly from the novel of 1897. And so Lugosi, it's extremely cliched to say it, but many cliches, it's very true. It's a two-way street. Everything from, there was a Kit Kat commercial last Halloween, 2020, I remember, that had the vampire coming out of a coffin that was basically enormous Kit Kat candy. And he was dressed and trying to imitate and sound like Bela Lugosi in the year 2020. And 90 years after the Lugosi film came out. And sometimes we don't even know. I think particularly modern people don't even know that the Dracula they know is Lugosi. His name in some quarters is forgotten. He's been dead since 1956. But that presence, that sound, his voice, the looks. He really did reinscribe Dracula from what Stoker described in the novel to what we still think of to the present day. And so I guess in the same way it's gripped popular culture for decades, including in things like the Count on Sesame Street, Count Chocula cereal, which is still made, and so forth. All of that gripped me too. It's just it never let me go, I suppose.
It must have been fairly difficult to write about Lugosi, especially in the era before the internet and some of the scholarship that's already been done on him, or that would be done eventually, because you were kind of breaking new ground by writing a lot about him.
I suppose by the time I was 13, 14, even before I met, coincidentally, that day, Forrest Ackerman, I was already trying to write to some authors, some film historians, and a wonderful teacher told me a great trick of that time, which is, and this, of course, again, long pre-internet and in the days when long distance was quite expensive, frankly. But a teacher told me, if you just write to the author in care of the publisher, because you can always get a publisher's address, write to them. And I did, and two of them wrote back, and they had both written books about Bela Lugosi by that time. And they both became very good friends of mine. One was named Richard Bajarski. He wrote a book that was published in 1980 called The Films of Bela Lugosi. The other was Robert Kramer, who wrote a book called Lugosi, the Man Behind the Cape. And I remember the first time I asked for that book, I had read about it in Famous Monsters. I asked at the library for it. Librarian was very sweet. She was convinced I was talking about the man behind the mask. And I had to keep saying, no, this really is the man behind the cape. And so my first experience with interlibrary loan, which I still use to access research and archival materials now, my first experience with it was getting Kramer's book via interlibrary loan. It was out of print by the time I was looking for it. I had gotten Bajarski's book. They were delightful. They were the type of writers, scholars who loved that somebody else was interested rather than being immediately suspicious or jealous, which, alas, happens so often in so many careers. But they were wonderful. And so they both started giving me addresses of a lot of the old actors, directors, writers who had worked on Lugosi's films, as well as some of the other old horror films. We're talking films of the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and this was the 1980s, the mid to late 1980s. And so I was very fortunate. They not only helped me with that, but also put me on to yet other clues of the time. For example, if you want to contact a director, an old film director, you believe they're still living, write them in care of the Directors Guild, and it will probably be passed on to them, to their home address. And so I did that with all the stamps I could muster. And by 1987, I was even publishing a newsletter on Lugosi, and it had the fruits of some of my first research. Like I was interviewing people like Arthur Lubin and Carol Borland and Robert Wise, and a lot of these people who were, affiliated with Lugosi films as well as other films. And I was also getting other writers to write for it. I had a submission, thankfully, from Robert Bloch, who had decades earlier written the novel that Psycho was based on, and contributions from some of the people like Ackerman, like Richard Sheffield, who had been a close friend of Lugosi's. Some of the other actors, Carol Borland had written one piece for, she was in a film with Lugosi called Mark of the Vampire, playing the vampire girl in the film. So I was fortunate. That kind of got me off and running. And so what I was trying to do, and I didn't realize that this was how trained scholars and trained historians are supposed to work. If they're not being overly jealous or petty or whatever, at least that is to say you do know what's been the work that's been done before, and you try to meaningfully add to it rather than just plagiarize, for example, appropriate from what's been done before. So that's what I was trying to do. And I was getting some great help from several of these people, including Ackerman, who was based in LA, knew a lot of these people. And so that was kind of me off and running, trying to do what I would still try to do with all of my scholarship, because I write about quite a bit, most of my time, other things than Lugosi. but to build on work of the past, bring to light forgotten information, facts, data, whatever. That's been my approach. And I was very fortunate again that some of these, I fell into the lucky situation, great people who were wanting to help rather than, frankly, some, as they do exist, who don't want to be helpful, So I was very fortunate.
When it comes to Lugosi, he had such an interesting career. I mean, even before he was Dracula on screen, he was such a well-known stage actor. I'm very curious as far as how do you, in your own work, how do you kind of split apart his career? Are there certain milestones for you when you look at where he was at certain times in his life?
It's been something I've not only thought about in terms of kind of periodization, the different eras of his life. And I guess we sometimes think about this even in our own lives, markers of importance, high school graduation or so forth. For me, it's actually guided my own research and even the way I've tried to present it in book form, which is to say, I've written a number of books on Lugosi, sometimes with my wonderful co-author, Bill Kaffenberger. And we have, as you get in depth in a subject, sometimes one book isn't enough to tell a story. And of course, we're talking about, and you're alluding to it very importantly, a man who really achieved some degree of fame in 3 different countries, which is quite an accomplishment. I mean, he did in Hungary, and he had to literally leave Hungary for political reasons that if we have time, we can discuss. But he literally had to leave Hungary. It wasn't by choice. And he had become a stage and as well as film star in Hungary. And then his first major port of call, he goes to Vienna, but his first major port of call afterwards was Berlin, Germany. And he was there really at the time. He was actually there for the release of The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and some of the other German expressionist films, the Golem, the 1920 version. And he makes a real presence. He didn't become a major star, but he achieved some degree of success in German films. And then he decides, a decision perhaps he had made even before Berlin, but he decides to go to America, and he becomes yet again notable, and in more than one way. He starts out becoming notable, building on his earlier fame in Hungary with the Hungarian-American community in New York in the early 20s, and teaching himself to learn English, also with the help of some other people, of course. He moves into English-speaking stage, Broadway, and then, of course, sound Hollywood films. So his life really is, all of our lives are episodic in some ways, from our, even if we think of grammar school to middle school to high school, there's various episodes in all of our lives, but his was really marked by episodes that involved major change. And so I do see those kinds of periods in his life, and I think some of that appears in the way I, and sometimes with, again, my co-author, Bill Kaffenberger, and such an important colleague and co-author. We do it sometimes in the way we present books. For example, shortly after this interview, in the next 10 days, the next Lugosi book of ours will be published. And it's part of a 2-volume set called Becoming Dracula, The Early Years of Bela Lugosi. And although that is even somewhat imprecise, because it covers his birth to September of 1930, when he signs the contract to play Dracula at Universal Pictures, which, of course, becomes the famous first sound version of Dracula, and one that is even going to be back in theaters in October, at least for one day, in theaters, including in Oklahoma City. So that would be one period, but I think you can subdivide it into Hungary, Germany, and then even his trek in America towards success, marked by, the immigrant culture, the Hungarian language theater in America, into silent films where the language barrier was not as much of a problem. Of course, if you didn't speak the language, even if it was made in a country where you did or didn't know the language well, you could still appear in silent films. But then on to success, English-speaking theater, English-speaking films. Some of the other books, I find the making of Dracula so important that I devoted an entire book to it, called Todd Browning's Dracula, Browning being the director of the film. and it's the making and distribution of the film. I've written a book on one of my other favorite of Lugosi films called White Zombie, which was a 1932 movie, the first feature-length zombie film in film history. So those are kind of periods that really focus kind of razor sharp on the making and distribution of given films, specific individual films. Some of my other books, though, one of my books, I think a lot of people that do know Lugosi might know him through Tim Burton's movie Ed Wood. Now that's already now in the past. It was a 1994 film with Lugosi as one of the, as played by Martin Landau, her part of that film story. I wrote one book on Lugosi's last years, and it was that Ed Wood period that became of such interest because of Ed Wood's own cult following, Lugosi's troubles and travails late in life, including a very public drug addiction. That book covers his last 5 years or so, and is called Bela Lugosi, Dreams and Nightmares. A couple of other periods, very quickly I'll mention. I wrote one book with Bill Kaffenberger called No Traveler Returns, and it was the period of Lugosi's life right after World War II. The film roles generally dried up on him. Things weren't great, but they weren't as bad as those final Ed Wood years. We're talking here about the late 40s, and he began to do whatever he could to make good living, and that meant a lot of vaudeville appearances, live appearances across America. Some are stock, where a major actor appears with local actors, paid good, but not necessarily the most prestigious of work. He even had a spook show for a while, where you come late at night, maybe even, the kind of, if not actually midnight, very late. Lugosi's live on stage with some magic and horror tricks, as well as one of his films on the screen. So that book, No Traveler Returns, covered that period of the late 40s. And so there's various ways we tried to periodize his life, and those would be, kind of among them, because I guess with whether on my own or with co-authors like Bill Kaffenberger, I've probably done, depending upon how you count them, 7 or 8 or 9 books on it. I say that last bit because a couple of the books are on individual films, not specifically about him, though he was the star of it.
Where does Bela Lugosi Meets a Brooklyn Gorilla fit in?
It fits into this period that really becomes there's many beginnings of the end with his Hollywood decline. But I think Bela Lugosi Meets a Brooklyn Gorilla, which was a film of 1952, that really, I think the beginning of the end, that's part of it. And you could say, oh, well, it's a film, and it did get pretty good distribution. In fact, it's an interesting film in the same way at the moment we're talking in film history, there's major concerns about brand new movies being released to streaming companies at the same time or very close to the same time they're in movie theaters. Bela Lugosi Meets a Brooklyn Gorilla was actually shown on TV while it was still playing movie theaters, and that caused a real uproar amongst the unions because that wasn't supposed to happen if you were a Screen Actors Guild member and so forth. So it's a curious film in some respects, and it's well worth talking about. If the listeners haven't seen it, it's not only is it readily available on YouTube, but it's curious because it has this comedy team in it. I knew one of the 2 members of the comedy team, and they were not just trying to be similar to Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, who were so huge at the time, but one of them particularly is doing Jerry Lewis to a point that some people have actually seen the film or at least glanced at it in passing and assumed it was Jerry Lewis. And that caused another uproar. But it's a fascinating little film. It has his name in the title again. And so, you could say, okay, well, he's making a movie and his name's even in the title. But nevertheless, 1951-52 really marks the beginning of the end of Lugosi's career. He had gone to England to do an ill-fated stage production of Dracula, live. It did extremely badly. He got back to New York City, and there's actually a letter I found of his where he says he got an offer to do Dracula in Australia, He's back on American soil. He says in the letter, I don't ever want to go through an experience like that again, meaning being trapped in another country with little money, a doomed show, and so forth. And he comes back to America, and a lot of the things I was alluding to earlier, like the summer stock and the spook shows, not particularly prestigious work, but it paid well and it was fairly steady. All of that kind of dried up after he was gone those months for the British stage tour. He comes back. He does Lugosi Meets a Brooklyn Gorilla that you've asked about, which is fascinating in its own way, including arguably for being a bad movie. Some people, of course, have that kind of so bad it's good attraction to some of the films we're talking about. After that, though, things really begin to fall apart. By 1953, he the year after Brooklyn Gorilla, he's in Glen or Glenda. He gets divorced. The work continues to dry up, and then the drugs become known, and his death and everything. So when I wrote that book on his last years, 1952 is actually the year I start, which is the year you're asking about in relation to that film, Bela Lugosi Meets a Brooklyn Gorilla. I made a documentary film about Lugosi, and it's on DVD. You can also find it at Vimeo to watch for free. It's called Lugosi, Hollywood's Dracula. Vimeo being a kind of similar to YouTube, So I actually filmed Sammy for that. He was a very nice man. He had been dogged, he and his partner, by Jerry Lewis and their producer at that time, because they thought it went beyond mere appropriation or homage. I like that word, of course, very well. They thought it went well beyond that to something more akin to dirtier words like plagiarism, because it was such in their eyes, a complete ripoff of Jerry's, persona. And so Petrillo was, he was not maybe in great shape at the end. His career hadn't gone as well as he wanted, and Lugosi Meets a Brooklyn Gorilla may have been the peak of his career. And as I was saying, it was starting to be the beginning of the end for Lugosi. So if that's your peak, as it was for Petrillo, that's, not great. He ended up in some other exploitation films and doing some live comedy acts, nightclubs and so forth, but didn't end up well off. He was living in Yonkers, New York when I filmed him in the mid-90s, probably 1996. But he was a very gracious man. He was very polite and nice. He teared up speaking about Lugosi. I think one of two things generally happened when people like Petrillo worked with Lugosi. Sometimes Lugosi kept very much to himself. He would stay in his dressing room or whatever. Most of his friends weren't Hollywood people ever. They were fellow Hungarians in Los Angeles or wherever he was living, New York City, etc. Nevertheless, though he tended to stay by himself, he to so many people, he was also very friendly, gracious, kind. And so half of the people I ever interviewed about Lugosi talk about him being, well, I really didn't get to know him. He stayed off by himself. They didn't think that he was being arrogant in that way. They just knew he was not mixing a lot with some of the cast always. But some of the others, like Petrillo, they remembered him extremely fondly because they thought that he treated them so very well. And especially on some of those low-budget pictures, because these were people whose careers, in some cases, were never really that great of careers, frankly. And so Petrillo teared up several times. In fact, you see some of that in the documentary I made. So he like some of the Ed Wood players, would also do. Lugosi had a profound effect on some of those people working with him.
That documentary is probably the first time where I actually ran across you and your name. And I don't want to change the subject too much, but I'm so curious about some of the mockumentaries that you've made over the years as well.
I continue to be interested in mockumentaries. I was watching just yesterday one of arguably, and I always want to say arguably because there's always interesting debates in film history and conversations to be had. But arguably one of the first mockumentaries I was watching yesterday, called The Hellstrom Chronicle, from the early 70s, in which a fellow talks to the screen in documentary fashion, and he's telling us about all of the problems insects will probably cause humankind. They're better suited to live even after nuclear holocaust or so forth. And then, of course, at the end of the film, even though he's been credited at the beginning with the name Niles Hillstrom and a PhD after his name and so forth, by the end of the film, it's revealed that he's just an actor, and we've been a bit had. And so I'm very much interested in mockumentary film. In fact, with a colleague named John Stringer, I think I did what was the second book on the subject of mockumentary. In some ways, it's a fascinating subject that you ask about, because while the 70s to the present have really seen the proliferation of, you might think of films like The Blair Witch Project or so forth, Best in Show, This is Spinal Tap, both comedy and horror. This kind of faking allegedly nonfiction footage certainly goes back to the 1890s. Say some of the footage of the Spanish-American War, the Boer War. I mean, these things were faked completely, and in some cases very obviously, as we watch them now, miniature ships being passed off as actual battleships. So in some ways, this kind of subject, I think it's particularly fascinating because it's one that's been around since the beginnings of film, My last example there is I like to show my students, sometimes I teach film, always at universities and film history, and I love to show them from the 1890s, one of the first films. It's known as Blacksmithing Scene. It was made by Thomas Edison's company. It's only seconds in length. You can watch it on YouTube if you wish. It's a few men around the device where they're hammering and doing the work as blacksmiths. Then they pass a beer around quickly to all three of them. But in reality, they weren't blacksmiths. They were workers at Edison Studios. So even that extremely early film Blacksmithing Scene arguably is a mockumentary, or some word mockumentary, of course, coming, a century later. But they weren't really blacksmiths. And so that's my point. And so I think it's a wonderful subject.
Are you a fan of the works of Colin McKenzie?
Yes, I am. I think there's so many wonderful people working in some of these areas. And there's a lot of them we could name. When I was at the University of Central Florida, where I taught as an associate professor for a few years, we had a 20th anniversary reunion of the team that made the Blair Witch Project, which I think was such a groundbreaking example of what we're talking about, including in its marketing. When it originally came out in 99, I was teaching at another university, and I remember a few students really believed, no, man, it's really real. And I was trying to tell them, no, this has been playing film festivals for many months prior to its major theatrical release, but they believed the early internet hype, which, of course, was what the film wanted people to do, at least to a degree. So Christopher Guest, there's a lot of wonderful people working in some of these areas. And I love it as a project for a lot of students, because mockumentary films, obviously, what they're mocking, well, they may be mocking many things, but one of the things they're mocking or appropriating, or I love your earlier word, homage, is documentary film. And in particular, the kind of handheld documentary style, verite, we sometimes call it, where, you walk around with the camera operator and a sound person and film something that's happening, the everyday life of a person or some event. There's such famous examples of this kind of film, Don't Look Back about Bob Dylan, the Pennebaker film, or, the Maysles brothers with their films like Salesman and Gimme Shelter, and at the Altamont Rolling Stones concert, where someone was killed. And so that's what's being appropriated. Well, why I love this form and why I love it for students is that you can make them on very, very low budgets, because by appropriating that type of documentary style, it doesn't matter if the lighting is natural, imperfect lighting. Documentaries would have the same. If the microphone boom occasionally comes in to the frame, this is all part of the veneer, the handheld camera, which allows you to shoot much quicker, and time is always money in any kind of filmmaking. And so I love the style, and I think it's a wonderful style for a lot of students to approach, because they so often want to make fictional films, which we all love. I love, but it's obviously difficult to pull off a realistic fictional film on an extremely low budget. Bela Lugosi Meets a Brooklyn Gorilla helps prove that point, I think, to allude to the earlier film. And mockumentaries, people expect that kind of rough edge as part of the style. And so I think it's a wonderful topic area. I'm so glad you brought it up.
You mentioned something earlier that just has me really curious as far as why Lugosi had to end up leaving Hungary for political reasons.
Yes. Well, that's a wonderfully horrible story. Wonderful as an interesting thing to research and read about. Terrible, certainly for him, because it did mean a lot of bad things for Lugosi. What happened, and it's difficult to know exactly, it seems like it was happening really in the late 1890s before he even got into theater. He certainly was working in various trades, the railroad business, mining. And I start there by way of saying he became interested certainly in the plight of the underpaid, the underprivileged workers, because he was one. And he saw unionization and what unions might be able to do to help people in Hungary at that time. He seems to become interested in unions for actors by 1905, 1906. He becomes more interested as time goes on, and that goes hand in hand with him becoming a more notable actor in Hungary, in Budapest specifically. And he certainly has a love of his homeland, we know, for a lot of reasons. Look, I lived outside of America for nearly 14 years in Ireland, and even living in a wonderful place like Ireland, which I dearly love and miss and have so many great friends, it's never a walk in the park if you leave your own country. And so home is home. Home is home. Home is where the heart is, even if home sometimes has bad things about it too, And so he loved Hungary, and he clearly loves the Hungarian people enough that he enlists before, he's not drafted. He enlists to fight in World War I and is injured. In fact, there seems to be indications he was injured more than once before he's released back to private life. So he's got some sense of patriotism, but he seems also skeptical of the ruling classes of the what was then the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which really kind of falls apart with the end of World War I. But at any rate, he gets back from the war. He becomes more and more involved in unionization efforts. His interest in such matters grows. The Austro-Hungarian Empire does fall apart, and Lugosi is there when it does. And he's there through two very short-lived regimes. And the first was led by a man who was very much had communist tendencies, even though he was born of aristocracy. In English, we would call him Michael Barrie. And he knows Barrie. He has loose affiliation with Barrie's government, which wants to take land from rich landowners and give to poor farmers and allotments, that kind of thing. Barrie loses power very quickly to a much more hard-left communist named Bela Kuhn. And Lugosi serves directly in Kuhn's government. He becomes a secretary, not as we might think in clerical matters like a typist, but something closer to Secretary of Defense or Interior, etc., as we think of it politically in America. He becomes enmeshed in completely unionizing, communizing Hungarian theater and film. So much so that he takes leave from the National Theater to do this. But the Kuhn government is quickly overthrown by an extreme right-wing government led by somebody who will remain in power for many years, including during World War II. When Kuhn's government, the communist government, loses power, well, people affiliated with it are subject to imprisonment or death. And that was no joke. I mean, Bill Kaffenberger and I have spent much time in Hungary doing research and finding documents, everything from political documents that Lugosi signed to manifesto speeches he gave, to some of the things, unfortunately, that did happen to some of the people who were imprisoned by what became kind of known as the White Terror. Anybody affiliated with this brief government of Kuhn's, when it fell in 1919, they were badly treated or much worse, let's say. And Lugosi fled to Vienna was the first major city outside of Hungary to get to. It was a place that he would have known some people, even if we knew he traveled there at least once before the moment I'm talking about, but he travels there knowing that a lot of people working in the Vienna film studios were Hungarians and vice versa, that there had been a lot of movement back and forth because of the geographical proximity. A lot of people in Hungary, particularly in Budapest, as well as Lugosi, he was born in a smaller town, but it had a large German population. A lot of Hungarians at that time in Budapest and others like Lugosi spoke some German, if not even a great deal of German, fluently. Lugosi goes to Vienna with his first wife. He's madly in love with her. We know this for a lot of reasons I can talk about, but we know he's madly in love with her and remains so for many years that follows. And those years follow without her because in Vienna, she ends up going back to Budapest. Lugosi goes on to Germany without her. And it's actually when he's waiting to leave by ship for America that the divorce paperwork is finally completely settled. And so political reasons, very real, serious political reasons, caused him to leave Hungary. He obviously had mixed feelings about that, including foremost, I would argue, the dissolution of his first marriage.
By the time this comes out, your new book will have already dropped. And I'm very curious if you can tell me a little bit more about that and what the inspiration was for that. And again, that time period that it covers.
Well, I think the inspiration was, there were a lot of reasons that limited research had been done on Lugosi in Hungary and Germany. The Hungarian part, which comprises his life really from basically, we're talking 1882 when he's born through part of 1919. So, we're not talking about a small period of time. We're talking about, a person in his mid to late 30s by the time he leaves. Hungary remained, there was yet another revolution around, shortly after Lugosi's death in 1956 that caused Hungary to become a communist country for many decades. And that made it difficult for prior researchers from the West to do. There were a couple of researchers who went, including my earlier mentioned friend, Robert Kramer. He traveled there once with Lugosi's fourth wife, doing research for that book of his. But staying there for extended periods of time, really digging into things, was difficult. There were other barriers, obviously, not being a native or even trained Hungarian speaker, reader. The archives in some disarray for years because people didn't care as much about the earlier period. Lugosi has gotten a tiny bit of acclaim in recent years in the 21st century in his home country because he's so famous in the West, but that's the only reason. He left in something under a cloud, rightly or wrongly, when he left in 1919. Some of his later films, Hollywood films, were shown in Hungary, but he was never a cultural icon there in the 20th century like he became an American, certainly not after he leaves. And so they had never done, no one in Hungary was ever interested enough in him, in other words, to really do tremendous research in the periods we're talking about. So there were a lot of reasons, I think, while there had been some coverage of his life in Hungary, and for that matter, Germany, it had been relatively limited. So I've spent many, many weeks in Hungary each day, 8-10-hour days going through documents and so forth. And again, with the luxury of its post-communist era, the luxury of, for all those years I was living in Ireland and in so much closer proximity than we are in North America, certainly aided by my equal and wonderful friend, colleague, co-author, Bill Kaffenberger on some of the trips, as well as a friend of his named Ray, wonderful gentleman, often digging into areas where we weren't even sure if we'd find anything on Lugosi because there were years where nobody really knew where he was. The same thing was true really of Germany because there was so much I found in my time in Germany researching him. And there had been limited work in Germany by previous scholars. So the idea here was, to fill in the gaps. And in fact, the gaps were larger than what had been filled in when it came to the Hungarian and German period. And so all kinds of great things, fascinating things emerged in the books I say books because it's 2 volumes called Becoming Dracula. And this includes everything from learning the first time he did anything close to a horror play, which he did as a relatively young actor, to the very fact that he was trying to start his own production company, Bela Lugosi Productions, in Berlin in 1920, when everybody else is running around making films like The Golem and releasing films like Caligari. So it was wonderful. It was a wonderful experience to spend so much time in those countries doing research, and even sometimes, at places he had lived, trotting the boards literally at a theater where he played for an entire season in 1903, 1904, in what was then Timișoara, present-day Timișoara in Romania, which, to end my answer, I would say was yet another fascinating but complicated matter of researching Lugosi. After World War I, there were parts of Hungary that became part of Romania, including his hometown. So it was basically Hungary, and I say basically because it was part of Austro-Hungarian, the empire, but it was Hungary when he was there. After he left, after the World War I, some of these areas became part of Romania, which itself was, of course, for many years a communist country. So wonderful stuff, but not always the easiest in terms of research.
Well, it sounds like you put a whole heck of a lot of work into this. I can't wait to read that. Well,
thank you very much. And we did, and Volume 1 really covers everything we just talked about. It finishes with him aboard ship and arriving, as he does, in America illegally, because he was working on the ship, even though he got fired as a worker on the ship during passage. And he basically comes into America illegally. And that's where Volume 1 ends. Volume 2 picks up with him getting to New York City from New Orleans, where he came in illegally to the port, and him situating himself with first the Hungarian American theater, and then all the way through the moment he signs on the dotted line to play Dracula for Universal. So that's Volume 2. So it's quite a story. It's really, we're talking about 48 years of his life. So, and thus 2 books, 2 volumes that comprise one overarching story.
It's so remarkable to even realize that he was 48 when he played Dracula. You'd think that it was much more of a young man's role, and because he does not look that old.
Lugosi did look younger than his years when he really first becomes a Hollywood star. Not just a notable actor, character actor, but a real Hollywood star. We're talking about a fellow in his late 40s. And he looks younger. And I think this is a big part of his appeal as this kind of he was meant to be attractive to women in the film. He was meant to seem very sexy to female viewers. The film even advertised with taglines about, the strangest love story ever told, the strange type of passion that Dracula was about, the allure of the vampire and so forth. And he looked younger than his years. And I think that certainly through 1935, 36, that first 5 years as a real star from the release of the film Dracula onward, he looked still young enough in his late 40s, early 50s, that it helps make him into, he becomes a horror film star, but for that brief period, relatively brief period, he also becomes certainly a bit of an attractive male star as well. And it is aided immeasurably, I think, by the fact that he looked younger than his late 40s when he plays that role.
So where's the best place for people to keep up with you and your work?
I'm certainly on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. A couple of my films are on Vimeo. And I also put a lot of my work, and this is maybe less known to people, but academia.edu is a place that I not only post a lot of my work. I'm an academic. I spent most of my career as a film historian inside, the university as a professor. Academia.edu, not only do I post news there, but I even post a lot of my stuff free to download when the publishers will let me, or when they haven't completely caught me, I guess you could say, because I love for people to be able to access this stuff. I think scholarship, and I hope most scholars, I do believe, feel this way. I hope more will do so. More universities will feel this way, that, we do this scholarship and it is for people to access. And so rather than an expensive book cost always, it's great to be able to have the stuff where people can download it, read it for free. And there's some of my work there at academia.eu, not just on horror films, Lugosi, but some of my other work about other aspects of film history.
Well, Mr. Rhodes, thank you so much for your time. This has been great.
Well, it's so very kind of you to ask me to talk and to indulge me as I've talked and talked and talked. So it's really wonderful to have a kind ear to listen to these old stories, but old stories that I hope still have some modern relevance or at least modern interest. So thank you very, very kindly.
There's a town I know where the hipsters go called Bedrock. Twitch, twitch, when you get an itch, then you do the twitch in Bedrock. Twitch, twitch, cause the twitching's fine. Have yourself a time in Bedrock. Twitch, twitch.
He's exciting. He's marvelous.
He's Fred. Well, we'll twist around the clock tonight in Bedrock. Twitch, twitch, and rock is gonna roll. 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 And rock is gonna roll.
Sorry. Must have dozed off.
All right, we are back, and we're talking about Bela Lugosi meets a Brooklyn gorilla. And let's talk a little bit more about Maurice Duke, and let's talk about Freddy's movie Fuck 'Em, which is just a fantastic documentary all about Maurice Duke and his career. And it takes you from the beginning all the way to the end. You managed to fit his whole life in there, or a version of it, I should say. And wow, what a story. What an amazing man.
He was. I was so lucky. Don't make me cry, Mike.
How did you decide that you wanted to do a doc about your dad?
Okay, there's a woman, she worked at BMI. She's a really good friend of mine. Her name is Doreen Ringer Ross. And she handles a lot of composers, and she goes to a lot of film festivals, and she's sort of the darling of a lot of composers. And she's one of my closest friends, and she said, God, you quote your dad every day. You tell a Maurice Duke story every day. Why don't you just make a documentary about him? And I went, why don't I? I've never made a movie, ever. But I found through my brother Alan Duke all the footage that we had from the 25th divorce anniversary party that we threw for my parents at the Friars Club, which had all of his comic friends roasting him. And it was my parents' actual 25th divorce anniversary. They were the best of friends. And that footage was valuable footage. And we owned it. Phil Foster used to make fun during the Friars Club roasting because we were filming it. Don't think for a second Duke's not selling this because why were we filming it? But look, I got all my footage from it, except that somebody came in and filmed my dad for some other documentary. So we had that footage, and he's actually telling the whole story because he's being interviewed as this elderly man 3 months away from death, telling his own story. So between the Friars Club roast with all the comics and that, and then some of my voice and some interviews with his friends, I had a movie.
I imagine that it had to be pretty challenging for you just to figure out what you're going to focus on, just because he did live such a long and storied life.
I didn't know how I was going to do anything. I just went around interviewing people for a while, and then I went around for a couple of years trying to find the editor. I could not find – an editor is everything with the documentary because they go through all the footage and they figure out really how to tell the story. Once I found my editor, I was in. Then it was a real film. But I stole stuff. I'm like my dad. I stole stuff. I stole everything. I mean, I can't sell it, music rights. I mean, in order to tell the story really well, I had to have expensive music, footage from movies that my dad did. I didn't ask for rights. I just grabbed it.
So what was the story when it was done? I mean, did you get it out to festivals or were you not even allowed?
I was probably not allowed, but I wasn't really making any kind of movies yet until that one, and people thought I was a filmmaker after that. So then the next because of the rights, my brother, who's an entertainment attorney, said, you can't. You're going to be in trouble. You just can't. But I can show it to anyone I want, and I can show it anywhere I want if and not make a dime. So I literally show it to everyone. I put it on Facebook all the time. I show it. People are in love with Maurice Duke. I've made people fall in love with my dad. Then he's been dead for 25 years because he's very lovable. He just is.
Fuck yeah.
That's a sequel.
What I loved in the movie, Freddie, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mike, was that everyone had a different version of the Hunt's Hall story.
Yeah.
They were at Sinatra's house. They were, it just goes all over the place.
The story about your dad's cane being shortened.
Yeah, Nemo.
It's so good.
That was truly when Nemo and my dad came out by train from New York. And so he thought the weather out here maybe made him a little taller, but it was really that it was being shaved down.
Well, he was sleeping. There's all of this really hysterical stuff and all of this very broad stuff that he did and Snoopy Poo and all that stuff. I got to say, my favorite Maurice moment was at your dad's funeral. Somebody got up and they said when Oliver maybe was born or when Alan was born, Maurice went into the... I'm sorry, could you tell the story?
He walked into Cedars and he said, I just want to be around long enough to see the kid get bar mitzvah.
No, that's not the story.
And he literally lived.
The story is he went into the nursery and lifted the blankets to make sure the legs were healthy.
Oh, that was Alan.
That was Alan?
Yeah, that was Alan. To make sure he didn't have polio.
That, amazing. Just amazing.
Freddie, tell me more about some of the other stuff that you've done. I'm very curious about this new one.
Oh, this new one is my mother died at 66 years old. And I started to have a lot of anxiety. I was just about to be 66 and I thought I was going to die. You have that fear. So much anxiety that I was like, what can I do with this anxiety? And I was like, okay, I'll make a movie. Like, doesn't everyone? And I'm going to just reveal some of the names in my movie because I haven't told anyone. But the movie's going to be seen on Sunday, so fuck it. I've kept it a secret. Some of my best friends are actresses, and I don't know if you know them, but Kimberly Beck, yours, mine, and out. Like, she worked with Hitchcock. Tracy Brooks Swope, a lot of stuff. She was married to John Avildsen. John Avildsen would come visit my dad in the hospital when he was dying. Stacey Nelkin from Halloween, a lot of my best friends are actresses. Rosanna Arquette is in it. And John Hawkes, the really serious actor that's like been up for Oscars. Like, really. So anyway, it's got a really fun cast and it makes no sense. And it's very much something my dad would make. And it turns out to be a dream at the end. And it plays in the it just played in the Chain Film Festival in New York. And it won for the best ensemble because it has a good ensemble. It has a good cast. But it probably makes very little sense. And it probably seems very self-indulgent because it's me, I'm dead, and people are talking shit about me. And I said to anyone who was in it, do you want to be in my film? And they didn't ask any questions. Like, okay. And then I go, talk shit say anything you want bad about me. It's okay. And they're like, what? And I went, yeah, just do it. It's like a mockumentary. So they did. And that's what the film is. And it's an hour and a half.
How much was cut out?
The kid stays in the picture. I'm like, everyone stays in the picture. I would not cut anyone out. If they gave me the time to be in my movie, like, do you know the child actor Billy Mooney? So one day I called Billy and I went, the little thing that you put on Facebook every Monday and you sing a little song? Can you send me a video of you talking shit about me or say anything you want about me? I'm dead already. That's all I gave him. That's all I gave him. In 10 minutes, he sent his back to me. I didn't have to go to people's houses all the time, but I did. But I didn't go to Billy's. That's what the movie is. It's like a hodgepodge of like whatever, like Dada art. They would throw things out, see what made art. That's what that is. That's what my movie is. And it's called Dying for Control.
I can't wait to see it.
The other movie I made is called 6 Degrees of Pussy. And it's not really about vaginas. It's actually about how much I love cats. But it is, it's vulgar. There's a lot of vulgar stuff because I'm Maurice Duke's daughter. I can't help it.
Is there a guy in a gorilla suit in your movie?
I forgot to get that. But guess what? My dad's in the movie because I can't do anything without my dad there. So my son's wife is my editor always on my stuff. And she would just throw my dad, like footage of my dad, like on a wall behind whatever was going on. Like you see the ghost of Maurice Duke kind of everywhere because he's so important to me. By the way, I did a play. The play was about my sex life in the 70s, and it was really out there. My dad would have loved it. It was really funny. And one time I went in for a tech rehearsal before the show, and because I had my computer, but I didn't realize what was going on, you see Maurice Duke, huge, like 8 feet tall on the stage in a play. Theater. And I'm like, oh my God, the ghost of Maurice Duke came into the theater. But it's really because there was an image of my father on my computer and it was bouncing off.
That was a terrific one-woman show, by the way. That was terrific.
Thank you.
I know Maurice kept on saying he wanted to do the Ross Columbo story?
He only writes the Russ Columbo story all his life until he died. And no, he never made it. But didn't Russ Columbo die in Rosemary Clooney's house?
You were friends with her son, right?
Miguel was my boyfriend. I am pretty sure that was it a gunshot?
Yeah, I think he was cleaning his gun.
I feel like it was 1019 North Roxbury Drive, which is Rosie's house.
Wow.
Oh my God. So you're friends with all those folks because you all went to Beverly Hills High together, right?
Yes. That's how I know. Yep.
Right. Wow. So
but I did grow up on Roxbury Drive, but not where the rich people did.
Yeah. South of Wilshire.
The other side of the tracks. That's right.
You were $1 million south of Wilshire.
Yep.
Right.
For 3 or 5 now. But it was a fabulous house that my dad bought for $42,000? No, $25,000.
Wow.
Well, we know where we siphoned off the budget for Bela Lugosi. It could have been $100,000, but I got a fucking house.
Oh, right. It was right around that time.
I mean, what would you do with $100,000 to make that movie better?
I'd take a little more time with the script.
And maybe see if there were Abbott and Costello impersonators around. I don't know. Really, what else would you do? You couldn't. There was nothing more to do, right? Yeah, you're right, Jamie. The script.
I mean, maybe spend a little more on the sets, on the actors.
I thought for sure when there were 2 gorillas, one a Duke gorilla and one a gorilla, that when Sammy leads the one away, that he would have taken the wrong gorilla and it would have led to hilarity there. I thought it was like, okay, that seems pretty obvious to me that's the joke.
Oh, yeah, well, they missed a joke because, well, not that joke, but they missed another joke where the other gorilla comes up to Duke and he can see that it's like a lady gorilla and it's getting amorous with Duke. Sammy should have turned to the camera and said, he always gets the girls.
Man, Sammy's voice after a while just really gets to you.
Come on, Doogie, let's go. The doctor's probably busy, and besides, I forgot something at the hut.
What?
I forgot to stay here. I'm getting out of here.
Relax, cuckoo.
Anybody who live in a creep joint like this must be a moronic idiot.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Zabor. Welcome to my creep joint.
Oh, gosh, I'm sorry, Mr. Idiot. I didn't mean to call you creep joint a creep joint.
I think nothing of it.
I'm going to say that Sammy really was the nicest, almost innocent, childlike person. I mean, I think it's hard to launch a career if you're an impersonator of Jerry Lewis. So I'm not sure that it was ever anything came. And I think he just wished that it would the rest of his life. But the sweetness in him was so dear that when I interviewed him for Fuck 'Em, he told me the sweetest story about my dad. My dad called him and he said, Sammy, do you want to come with me to a play tonight? So he thought he was going to a huge play. And he got all dressed up. My dad picked him up. They went to the valley to where my dad's sister's kid, a cousin of mine, was in like a school play. And my dad took it really seriously and showed up as the big producer, impresario. And Sammy just thought it was so sweet because it was. I mean,
it was that side.
All right, guys, let's go ahead and take another break, and we're going to play a preview for next week's show.
No soy un árbol. Un hombre desnudo. Un soldado verde.
Un niño es el elegido.
Adrián, chaval, ¿tú estás loco? ¡Estoy hasta los cojones de la pensión compensatoria! ¡De los jueces! ¡Si no la bruja de su madre! ¡Aparte, señora! ¡Abre!
Silvia, perdona. A ver, te pregunto yo lo que le das de merendar al niño.
¡Elena! ¡Hostia puta! ¡No la toques! ¡Oye, que se te va a pegar, joder!
La brujería, el concepto nació aquí.
¡Hola, chaval! ¿Qué hace con la escoba?
Barrer no, desde luego. Pero ellas nunca piensan lo que parece que piensan. ¿Y en qué piensan? No lo sé, pero piensan otra cosa.
¿Y nosotras qué somos?
Una chica de tu edad lo que tiene que hacer es drogarse.
Folla como una perra, miente todo lo que puedas, engaña a los hombres, que estás en la edad.
Ha llegado el momento de la venganza. ¿A dónde vais?
A impedir que tu madre destruya la civilización occidental. ¿Te parece bien?
¡Y hará justicia!
¡Justicia! ¿Pero qué dices? ¡Tú eres idiota! ¿Que me dejo llevar?
A mí las brujas no me dan miedo. A mí lo que me dan miedo son los hijos de puta.
That's right. We'll be back next week with a look at Alex de Iglesias' Witching and Bitching. Until then, I want to thank this week's co-hosts, Jamie, Rich, and Freddie. Jamie and Rich, what are you guys working on these days? Are you still writing together or doing separate projects?
I'm still writing. I just finished an original Christmas script. Yeah, and I teach screenwriting at USC and working on a television series about the first Super Bowl with producer John Katzman, whose grandfather, Sam Katzman, Maurice Duke, worked with. Still doing that and also making time to text and call and email Jamie with bits and memories several times a week.
Oh, do you guys talk that much? That's so sweet.
Yeah, well, with emails and texts.
Yeah,
and
because I
everything.
can't stand to look at them anymore. So to text and email is the way to go.
Jamie, what are you working on these days?
I'm an executive, creative director at a company called Fremantle that takes up all my time. They're really great. It's a good creative outlet.
Freddie, is there a good place for people to keep up with you and your work?
You know, Instagram, Fredde Duke, FreddeDuke, Fredde Duke at Instagram, or you'll see things if I'm doing them. I will post about it. I keep having to post about this film festival, and I'm like, okay, last call. Please buy a ticket. Like a little carnival, you know. I felt like I was from a circus family. So it's like, you know, put up a tent. If anyone's ever seen a movie with my daughter, Augie Duke, she does the really great, a lot of low budget Maurice Duke-esque movies. She stars in, and she's in my movie, my daughter.
Well, you were in a movie that a friend of mine always talks about, Vasectomy, A Delicate Matter.
Oh, wow.
Who
talks about that?
It's my friend Chris Gore. He runs Film Threat, and he loves vasectomy. So
I don't even know what to say to that, except to cringe and say Bob Burge, who made the movie, was a friend of my dad's. And so when he would get money, he would put together a movie, and they never made sense, as my dad's movies didn't. Neither did this guy, and they would throw me in.
Well, thank you so much, folks, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projection booth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.
Does she love me? It's too soon to know. Can I believe her when she tells me so? Is she fooling? Is it all a game? Am I the fire or just the other flame? Now a drifting, or she's playing a little part. Now, if she loves me, let her tell me so. I can't hold her if she wants to go. Oh, I'll cry when she's gone. I won't die, I'll live on. If it's so, it's too soon, way too soon to know. Now, does she love me? It's too soon to know. Am I the fire or just the other glow? I won't cry when she's gone. I won't die, I'll live on. If she, it's too soon. Wait.